in the homeless space. And she runs the micro centers, and she is just dedicated. We also have a very special guest today, Alvin McCormick. He is the manager, the kitchen manager of SwitchPoint, and he is another one who has lived experience. If you ever are bored on a Saturday night and you want to see a real live chase scene, go on to Dave DeRocher's website and look at what happened to him. He was actually one of those people that the Highway Patrol, California Highway Patrol, chased, did the maneuver, got him out of the car. 17 years in prison is what he tells me why his skin looks so nice and healthy. Moderator again, our great moderator, former speaker Greg Hughes. Greg, the time is all yours. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I'm telling you, this is a who's who here. I'm not gonna bore you with the preface and the things I said earlier. We're just gonna jump straight into it. What I appreciate about this group is, and all groups, not saying the last group wasn't incredibly informative, because they were. There is something about been there, done that, don't you think? Someone that's walked a mile in someone's shoes, they kind of have that. I call it empathy. You know, empathy is a real thing. It helps you understand things on a deeper level. I think the panel that we have in front of us right now can speak from very different perspectives of the same issue, having lived it the way they have. And so I really do. I'm expecting, you know how I said, well, I told you I wasn't going to preface anything, and here I am. I want the conversation to feel uncomfortable. Governor's got a little uncomfortable. I thought that was good. And not in a bad way. And it's not vindictive. I just think that this issue is so tough. This space is so tough. If we don't start talking about this, and even in the uncomfortable terms, I don't know what we're going to learn or what we're going to apply. So with that, let me just start now. You've been introduced. You don't need any more. You're in this space. You're working on this so much. This is a very general question. I'm actually going to pull more from these questions. But in your opinion and your life experiences, can you identify a root cause or causes that find people experiencing homelessness? Is there an answer to that? What's the root cause or causes? And we'll start with you, Dave, if that's all right.
I think there's a number of different causes. I know for me, I was never chronically homeless living in a tent under a bridge. I was situationally homeless due to the decisions that I was making in my life. I think drug addiction is a big, big part of how people find themselves on the streets, because eventually you're stealing from your families, they kick you out, you have no place to go. But those are decisions. The same thing happened to me. There's a number of different factors you have to take into consideration. There are many people on the streets today that suffer from severe mental health issues. We need to separate those from the drug addict that's out there dealing drugs and trying to hurt people. We need to separate those two populations and deal with us accordingly. Get those who are on the streets that have severe mental health issues, who are on the streets by no bad decisions of their own, the help that they need immediately. Every other drug addict, including myself, I always knew I had two options. Keep using, ask for help. We all know those two options are available. If I'm offered help and I do not choose that help, I don't deserve to be on the street terrorizing the community. I shouldn't be breaking into your car. I shouldn't be breaking into your home. I should be held accountable for the decisions that I'm making. And I'm here to tell you that for prison terms, I am grateful for every second, every minute, every hour, day, week, month, and year that I did in prison. It saved my life. Much of the narrative today is we can't incarcerate people. It's traumatizing. Well, if I OD on fentanyl and I get Narcan, that's not traumatizing. Breaking into people's homes when you come home and all your valuables are gone, that's not traumatizing for you. The problem we have, I think, today is we've made the drug addict criminal the protected class. People always say to me, Dave, you're hard on yourself. You've made a lot of mistakes. No, I didn't. I made conscious decisions to do the wrong thing. When I got held accountable for those things and went to an organization like this in California and people told me the truth about myself, I was able to change.
Thank you. And I got to tell you, what you heard, thank you. You don't hear this very much. You don't hear this very often. And no one has more credibility, more time spent, more sweat equity into a space than the space we're talking about right now. So thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Mo, good to see you, brother.
Thanks. What a blessing to be here. And, today I'm 17 years clean and sober. Smoke. I smoked drugs for over 20 years, and I was homeless in San Francisco's Tenderloin District for 10 years. And what I didn't have access to when I was homeless was family and community. And once I was separated from family and community, game over. And so I think what we're trying to accomplish here in Utah, that's the thing that has to be established first. A community of your peers, folks that hold you accountable. I love what the governor had to say. And I think that our legislators, our politicians, and our community in general pretty much get it now. The thing is, what does that look like? What does that accountability piece look like? We talk about it a lot. What does it look like in action? What does that implementation process look like when you're walking into one of the resource centers? What does it look like when you're walking into a homeless shelter? And I think that's the number one thing that we have to address. What does that accountability piece look like? What trusted organization and individuals will we have to lead us through that process?
Thank you.
I got totally distracted because Mo's got the greatest socks I've ever seen.
Let me see. No, those are awesome.
Way to go,
Those are
Mo.
great socks.
You know, I'd like to take a sentence from Alan Graham, who founded the Community First Village, which is the catastrophic loss of family is a major cause of homelessness. And man, have I seen that in the last 10 years. Without that connection, that bridge, that support system, that spiral that these two have already pointed to, there's no fallback system. And then the second piece of that is, and in my experience with 10 years, is the lack of affordable housing, deeply affordable housing. And so when we were doing the first overflow in 2020, and then for the next 4 years, over and over again, more than 80% of the clients that came through winter overflows had money. They had work, they had disability or Social Security, but they couldn't afford to be anywhere, and so they were forced into homelessness. I'll turn it over to Alvin, but I met Alvin on the street before winter hit. And you know, he's like, I want to work. I have been working, but when I lost that job at the Salt Palace, the whole thing uncrumbled because there was nowhere that I could afford to go. And so there's kind of this two-pronged approach, you know, of what causes the homelessness, and I think it's a lack of support system and housing.
Hello, everyone. I did come from the streets. I was born and raised in San Francisco, California, in the project housing. What I've seen today out here in Utah is just what these gentlemen are talking about. There are no resources for people to turn to, no resources for people to go to and get this help or even know how to ask for it. The mentally ill out there have no clue as to what's really going on. They need people to come help, to go out into the streets, pick them up, and get them someplace where they need to be. If it wasn't for Rocky Anderson and Carol here, I would still be out there. When they showed up, it was a gift. I was sick from doing methamphetamine that's laced with fentanyl these days. And this is killing people. I've watched 90-pound woman smoking fentanyl and be okay, and a 200-pound guy take that same piece of foil and drop dead. This is a problem, and it needs to be dealt with. How? Don't ask me. I'm just a recovering drug addict myself. I had to do it for myself before I could do anything else. It's not something that you could do for somebody else. You have to want it yourself. It's hard. I've come from right off the streets, living in a tent and under a shopping basket, to where now I live in one of the Point, and I'm manager of the kitchen. But it's something that I had to want. I was working for a company beforehand, CMG. We did all the events. I made very good money. But living in motels, the cheapest motel a month is $2,266 a month. I know this because I did it for over a year myself. And I was basically homeless. I might have had a motel room, but that was it. I was on my own. I'm from California. I'm in Utah. Didn't know anybody. Really didn't want to know anybody because it got me in trouble in the past. Drugs and alcohol is something that's just happens. It's in your blood. You're raised with it. Myself, I was. Growing up in the ghettos of San Francisco, you live drugs. What's your highest expectation in life? It isn't that $100,000 a year job. It's that drug dealer that's out there making that $110,000 a week. That's what you see. That's what you inspire to. I've had a different way of life. And today, it scares me to think of what this younger generation is going through and where are they going to be when they're my age. I've lived a hard life. And it's probably going to be harder. But I try to make it as easy as I can. With the help of Carol, it's going that way.
Thank you. So I heard you got to make a choice. You got to ask for help. That's either keep using or ask for help. The lack of family, or family is a massive and great resource for help. The lack of it contributes to this. Same with our communities and how engaged they are. We've heard about, again, Carol mentioned the family and how there's such a strong tether there. The lack of housing. Housing in Utah is you may as well live on the East Coast or West Coast in some of the most highest real estate areas. That's what Utah's housing is looking like in terms of lack of affordability. So these are great issues. I'm curious about a topic with that in mind, what we just said. I'm curious about the unsheltered, okay? And I'd love your opinion about this because there's two things going on with the unsheltered, and we heard this in the panel before. We have people that are self-medicating or have done it for so long, there's a resistance to any of it. There's a lack of trust. They don't want to follow the rules. But then there's this horrible irony that there are people that don't want to go to the shelter because they have everything that they have. If they put it in a storage unit, it could be stolen. They could be preyed upon. There could be drugs dealt, or there could be human trafficking going on. So what they're saying when they're shelter resistant is people don't follow the rules in there. So I don't want to go. So you have people that don't want to go in because they don't want to follow the rules, and you have people that don't want to go in because the people inside, some of them aren't following the rules. And so you have this conflict going on. With what you're seeing every single day, how you work with people, how do we work with our shelter resistant, knowing that we have those two variables of those that may not want to follow the rules, but those that do feel like they're still going to be stolen from or harmed in some way. So there are people inside those centers that are not following the rules themselves. How would you tackle that, or how do you tackle that in approaching people that are unsheltered? I don't want to keep picking on Dave going first. Whoever wants to start.
Okay, I'll start. One of our taglines at SwitchPoint is opportunity with accountability. And sometimes that's a hard pill to swallow for social service providers. But truly, there has to be an expectation of you're going to live here. It's no different than, when I raised 4 boys. If you live in this house, under this roof, these are the rules of the house. And if you don't want to accept that, then go find somewhere else to live. And we've seen it happen over and over and over again where people step up. Oh, okay, I get the rules. We've seen it happen at the overflows, at the micro shelters, at our shelters, in our housing. And truly, it makes the majority of the residents or clients that are staying in those facilities feel safe, because then they're like, okay, some enforcement's happening. And those that are not going to follow the rules and end up getting kicked out or trespassed or arrested for their behavior, then it sets that precedent. One of the first things that we did 10 years ago when we started in St. George was to make sure we had a substation with St. George City Police on campus, right in our building of our shelter. And visibility to me was everything. And if people can see that difference and they can see that unsafe behavior is not going to be tolerated, it mitigated a lot of the predatory actions that were happening. at other shelter environments, right? And so that really stepped it up to what we expected as a provider. We want to help you, but you can't behave in a way that's going to put other people in an unsafe environment.
Thank you.
I think it's important to, we hear the word accountability a lot. We hear it a lot. And at the Other Side Academy, we've been open since 2015. Right now we have 160 people living right here on property. About 130 students, 25 staff members, and the rest are graduates living across the street. Every single one of our students, there are no exceptions. If you come through the front door and take a seat on the bench, or if we interview you in jail and you get sentenced here, every single one of our students is on adult parole and probation. In nearly 9 years of operation, we have never given a dirty drug test to adult parole and probation. Why? Because we hold people accountable, because we don't allow it to happen. We have standards, we have rules you have to live by. When we're on the streets, when I'm homeless on the street, and I can either stay homeless on the street situationally, or I can go someplace and get help. If I do not choose help, I need to be held accountable to those decisions. That's the problem in our communities now, is we're not holding people accountable. I ask this question all the time, and I'm gonna ask it of this group. Is the problem in our communities getting better? Hands up. I don't see a single hand. Is the problem in our communities getting worse? Hands up. So the hands went up for worse. We have to ask ourselves why. If the current thing that we're doing, when we don't want to tell people the truth, we don't want to hold them accountable, it's what's causing this problem. And what people don't understand, if you've never lived in the lifestyle, the game has changed. Fentanyl is now everywhere. People are dying. We have to start rethinking how we're going to do things. We have to start doing things for people that they're incapable of doing for themselves. Let me give you an example. When we arrest people on the streets for committing crimes, dealing drugs, breaking into your car, stealing your wallet, accosting you crossing the street, more times than not, we're arresting you. What happens when you get arrested? Within 10 hours, you get released. If you're dope sick, where are you going? Now they say you have a promise to appear. You got to call in, pre-trial release. But if I'm dope sick, where am I going? To the drug dealers. When they arrest me, if they hold me just a little while longer, 2 weeks, maybe 30 days, what am I doing while I'm in jail? I'm detoxing. Now we got to be better while we're in the jails of giving different options and different opportunities to people. Here's Happy House, here's the Other Side Academy, here's the Haven, here's 7th Street. Now you're going to ask me to go someplace and get help while I'm no longer kicking drugs. What do you think the odds of my success are then? But we're not doing that. We're arresting and releasing and arresting and releasing and arresting and releasing. How do we expect anybody to change if we're not going to hold them accountable and start to do things that are going to be better for them long term? Hold them a little while longer, force them to detox whether they want to or not, then offer them help when they're lucid and clear and no longer kicking, and see what happens then.
I got to follow up real quick. That sounds too strict and too mean. So you must have no one coming here, because that seems like too many rules. I'm exhausted listening to it all. Are you empty here? How are you getting anyone to follow what you just described?
Yeah, because people do want to change. They just need the opportunity, and they need to go someplace that's efficacious. And believe it or not, would you like some heroin? No? Would you like some meth? No, now ask me if I want some.
You want some meth?
No, get out of my house. It's a choice. When we hold people accountable to the decisions they make, we can influence profound human change. They both just chose no. I'm a former drug addict. I chose no. When we allow people and we start holding them accountable to the decisions they make, we can help people change.
Thank you.
Yeah, so when we get into a little bit more homelessness and this housing first, I think that the human first approach has its place as well. So homeless in the Tenderloin District in San Francisco, I had a lot of housing vouchers, right? And most people are thinking, problem solved. He's got a house, he's got a home, problem solved. No. I take that housing voucher into my new place, SRO hotel or apartment or what have you, and I got crack, heroin, meth, and everything else in my pocket. 2 weeks later, everybody else that I know is in my place doing drugs. 2 months later, I'm evicted in the back of the line for services sponsored by taxpayers. That's the model that currently exists. Of course, I needed housing, but I had no idea of how to keep and maintain that place. And I think those are some of the issues that we need to address right now, because Utah is rich with resources, right? And we also have to hold ourselves responsible and accountable for when we give out those resources as well. Are we just giving them out and not expecting anything from anybody? Another example is when I meet people on the street, I'm recruiting them for a prep school and to eventually live into the other side village, I see that a lot of people have already had housing. They've already had jobs. Their issue is, how do I keep it and how do I maintain it? What does that piece look like? You meet some people on the street, they're ready to get their lives together, they think that the American dream can get back on the table, we get them into a detox, right? And detox absolutely works. After 2 or 3 days or a couple weeks, depending on what drug you're detoxing from, your thinking is better, you look better, everything is better about you. There's the window we have to help that person out. And what happens all too often? They get released from the detox, go back into a toxic relationship, a homeless shelter, or a homeless encampment. What a waste of resources, right? And so we need to figure out, what does it look like to walk that person through all of those steps? Does it need to be under a roof? I think the same roof. I think so. If I'm homeless and all of a sudden my camp gets broken up and somebody comes out with a flyer and says, oh, go to this place. And then I go to that place, and then the next place I go to, well, we're going to send you over here. It's really transactional. You need to meet somebody that's going to walk you through it, create a growth plan for you, and walk you through each step of the way. Housing, community, relationships, trust. And I think that's the piece that we're missing right now.
So Mo, follow up for you. So you're approaching the housing resistant, and you're not describing an easy path forward. You just like Dave described. It's pretty involved. How do you reach someone who's in that situation in their life, or they are housing resistant, they're homeless? What is that? Where do you see that light bulb? What do you communicate, I guess, that has them follow you and say, okay, I've bought into what you've just described. What is it that you share with them?
Absolutely. So I tell you one thing, it's not going to happen overnight. Okay. It's going to take me building a relationship, a friendship, and building trust with that person, right? Most of the people that I've met on the streets have gone through 30, 60, 90-day programs. The end result, my experience and their experience has been, at the end of those programs, I've failed and I've relapsed again. Why would I subject myself to another program or going into another homeless shelter? So I think one of our unused resources on the streets is our homeless advocates on the streets. Because when I talk to them, they know exactly what medication you're on, they know what drugs you're on, they know what your situation is. They're equipped to help people get to the next step. We've had a couple people that were referred to us by homeless advocates on the streets. And I recall a conversation with one of the homeless advocates. They said, hey, I knew this time that she was ready, right? Because they were with them. They had built that relationship. They know where they are in their recovery process, and they're in a position to say, you know what? Here's a step for this person. Here's the next step for this person, and can refer them to the right place. So I think our homeless advocates on the streets could be a better resource as well.
So over time, in that individualized attention,
it takes time.
Carol, so shelter resistant, you talked about accountability and opportunity. How do you reach them where people are buying into what you're providing?
Well, I've run into a lot of them that were shelter resistant, but not housing resistant or not employment resistant. And so when you can offer some choices of, hey, like Alvin, you don't want to go to the shelter. You know your stuff's going to get stolen again, but do you want to move into housing and actually get employed? Hell yeah, I think is what you said, maybe with a couple other little words in there. But he was so excited, and it was an immediate, yes, that's what I've been wanting. I just haven't had a choice, right? And to be able to offer, a plethora of choices, we were really excited to be able to open, about 45 days ago, a facility in Mill Creek. And with the support of the city and UIP and the state, we looked at this facility that could house women who had chronic homelessness and chronic mental illness. Now, they don't do well with chronic mental illness in shelters. They were very shelter resistant, but they still, all of them, wanted somewhere to go. It just wasn't that place, a shelter, because it was too much noise, too much sharing. They needed their own place. And all 16 of them have done really well trying to, and in 45 days, acclimate to, this is your house, these are the rules, you're gonna pay your rent, and this is the program.
So let me touch on that. So I liked how human first versus housing first, and you're saying these different options and opportunities. Is everyone prepared to be in housing on their own, or how does that work if they, instead of a shelter, they opt for housing? Or is everyone prepared to be in that environment?
I'll say hell no.
Okay, that's
Can I
what I
say
was.
that?
That's the uncomfortable conversation we need to have, right? Hell no.
You know, they're not ready.
Yeah.
And I have a real hard time with housing first when we're looking at all these different reasons that people are in homelessness or experiencing homelessness. Sometimes they do need to get ready. Maybe it's ready on, just their soft skills, or how to be a good tenant because they've destroyed so many things, or how to be held accountable, or how to get sober. There's a time and a place for people to say, these are your keys, this is your place, now pay your rent. If we can make sure that our housing first model has all of the real support systems, I think too many times we get bound because of lack of resources, lack of people, that we had a housing first model, but no resources were attached to it, or not enough resources were attached to it, and that wraparound support system. And so then they fail. And that should be on us, right, as the provider.
So the accountability portion does not go away, even if it's housing instead of a shelter. There's a high level of accountability in that environment. Alvin, you shared a great experience. Thank you, Carol. You shared your personal experience. You are someone that can share empathy and really communicate with people. You're in front of someone that's shelter resistant for a myriad of reasons. How is it that you reach them and help them turn their lives around and seek help?
Most of the people that are shelter resistant, they have fears and phobias, being around too many people. I have them myself. I was telling Carol before I came here, I have severe stage fright.
You're handling it well. I'd have never known. You didn't even have to tell it. We'd have never.
You have to sit down with the individual and get to know them personally, on a personal level, and find out what their phobias are. What is it that makes them want to run? Because most of the homeless, that's what they're doing, is running away from something. If you could find out what that is and try to turn that around, it might help them. I'm not going to say it will, but at least they have somebody they can connect with, and it makes them feel more comfortable and more willing to come inside them doors.
I think one of the common themes we're hearing right now is there is that we can talk data, and we know that data is important, but where we get into the micro, when we get into these individual relationships, when you talk about specific accountability, that informs that larger data pull or that macro when you're looking at that through the lens of an individual and doing it individually. Here's a question. So I wasn't gone that long, but I'm telling you, from 15, 16, 17, 18 to 2024, it's not black balloons, and it's not heroin, and it's not opioids anymore. It's this fentanyl. This is what I've heard all day today. What is the role of drugs in this society right now? How are our young people learning about, seeing it? It sounds like there's a common theme also with the drug abuse or the drug dealing and the preying upon. Talk about what you're confronting in terms of society in 2024, looking very different than even when I was on the clock. What is the culture with drugs, with the general population?
Greg, thank you. This hits home for me. Track with me. So we go around the country studying other models all over the country and all over the world. And it was about a year ago, I was in Kensington. Anybody familiar with Kensington? It is literally an open air market. We drive in. When I open air market, I mean people just out in the public doing drugs. We drove by with me and some colleagues. I wanted to get out of the vehicle and interview people, but they didn't want to get out of the vehicle. And there's a pregnant woman with a needle in her arm. It was the most disgusting thing I'd ever seen. We drive a little farther, we pull up to the curb, and there's a whole group of people, and they're dropping their syringes, and they've got needles in their arms, and this isn't a community in the United States of America. This is a community. There are police cars, it's called Kensington. Google it later, and you'll see what I'm talking about. There are police cars backed into some of the apartment complexes just sitting there to make sure there's no violence, but we're allowing this to go on in our neighborhoods. When those kids leave those homes, those apartments that they're in, and they walk down the street, what do they see? We're normalizing drug use in this country, and then we're pretending like we care about what's happening. We are causing the problem. When you look at Portland, we've completely lost the city. when we legalized it. Now, let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. I was a drug addict for 27 years. I learned to drink at home by watching my dad. That's where I learned to do it. He didn't sit me down and teach me how to drink. I was watching him open up a can of beer, watching his friends come over, and I started doing the same thing. That's when it started. Right now, let's assume Greg Hughes is not a drug addict. Is that fair to assume?
That is
It's
fair to assume.
But let's just say tonight, after this summit, he's just stressed out. He goes home and he wants to smoke a joint. He probably has the intellectual capacity and the emotional maturity to understand the decision he's making. So now he's going to smoke pot going forward. I guarantee you he won't be doing meth a year from now. But his 16-year-old son comes home from high school, baseball practice, walks in the house, and smells pot. Who's he stealing it from 6 months from now? Who's he stealing it from 6 months from now?
I would kill that kid, I'll tell you right now, if he did
Right,
that.
as well you should. Now, who's that kid hanging out with? Other kids doing it? Some of them aren't just smoking pot. The 16-year-old doesn't have the intellectual capacity or the emotional maturity to understand the decision they're making. Some of those kids he's smoking pot with are doing other drugs. We just created the next generation of drug addicts. As we continue to legalize drugs in this country, we're going to see the problem grow at rates we cannot keep up with. We're going to lose so many people. We collectively are creating the problem.
So I think one of the issues we have is that we're not having the hard conversations about behaviors.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that we need to address. When I go to or my experience, when I went to a drug rehab, I wrote down, here's the drugs I did, here's the people I hang out with, here's the women that I with. It was just a drug log, right? I never really had an opportunity to address my behaviors. I can get through a 30, 60, 90-day program and nobody would know who I am. I could fake it all the way through and you wouldn't know. And then I would graduate and go back and fall on my face. Surprise. So you have to have some kind of system set up where those behaviors come out. You need a practice ground. And I think one of the avenues that you do that through is social enterprise businesses. While people are in rehab, while you're working in those social enterprise businesses throughout the day, at some point, it may be a week or two or a month from, down the line, your behavior is gonna come out. And that's an opportunity for your coach or a mentor in that community to address it. It's an opportunity for your peers to hold you accountable and say, you know what? The behavior that you just showed, that's stealing. That's lying. It has to be a practice of ground where I can say, you know what? Here's my behavior. Here's who I am. And here's who I want to change. And this is how I fix it. It has to be a community that wraps you around and says, you know what? I'm going to point out your behaviors.
Does that practice ground have to have a work component in it? Is that how you see it come out in terms of responsibilities and jobs, or is that just an example?
And in my experience, that's the avenue that I see that works. If there's something else out there that works that can accomplish the same thing, more power to it. But I've seen that the social enterprise businesses, not only do you find out about your behavior, but it creates a work ethic as well. It gives you an opportunity. How am I going to solve hard issues? Am I going to continue to be violent? Am I going to continue to use drugs, sex, or alcohol to work through those problems? Or in the moment, am I going to have a community and a family around me that's going to teach me how do I work through those hard conversations and those hard moments without being destructive?
Thank you. Carol.
I'm just going to say amen.
Can I get a witness from the congregation? That was amazing. I'm telling you, I love those answers.
I totally agree with the work part. I'll use Alvin again as the choice was you have to be sober, to work for me. And anyone that you hire or you bring in, to the kitchen as well has to be sober. And so he wanted it that bad that he was like, you're right. The more productive and the more time that they are spending on something that is good, the less time that they're concentrating or yearning for bad, right? The drugs. And so we see it happening over and over again. We're very similar with SwitchPoint and the other side Academy is we love micro enterprises and that social entrepreneurial spirit of saying, we're gonna go do this and I need, how many of you wanna go work for me right now? And they raise their hand and we get them going. That really, to me, is the productive time and building that community. Then they wanna stay sober and clean.
Thank you. Alvin, what's your experience with this in terms of practice ground, or how, drugs, as David just described, there is a pervasive and a more societal normalization of drugs. At the same time that's harming, we know that it harms people. How do you combat that? And if you've heard these descriptions about what earned success or jobs bring, micro enterprises, what's your experience with that, or what's your opinion?
Well, recent experiences, I have the second person that was standing there when Carol picked me up, now works with me, lives in the same building. He's my number 2 person. What kept him from the drugs is having something to do besides sit around, watch TV, and go out and run the streets. You sit around too much and your hands will get idle and you'll want to crave something. The most familiar thing is out there running them roads back and forth, just like you'd do if you were dealing drugs or doing them.
Thank you, Alvin. I would just tell you that I think that the common theme here is we are in dangerous times in terms of what our young people are seeing of the role of drugs and societal acceptance of it. Earned success in any way, shape, or form sounds like it's the way that we all forget about the spaces you're in. For myself, being raised by a single mom, moving around from apartment to apartment, I think I stand here today because I had some earned success. I had some challenges in front of me. So I love these answers. Thank you. Let me ask you this. After all that you've said, let's talk about the, where is it at? These camps, the large camps that we're looking at. There's a philosophy out there that where it's hard in the resource centers where you have 300 beds or so, or it's hard by way of capacity. Is there an approach where you can have these encampments even organized? If you had maybe the police that are there, what the question was, I've been floating around it, but should camping be allowed in these areas of Salt Lake City and Salt Lake County? Should we be paying attention to those encampments and providing something towards those encampments, or are those encampments on the whole something we should see less of? What do you think, Alvin? I'll start with you first. Sorry.
I believe Carol would have a better answer than I would on that one.
You won't get fired.
As far as I know right now, we're working on getting a bigger encampment. I'm not sure where or how it's going. All I know is we're supposed to be cooking for them.
Okay.
And as far as the encampments go, it could go either way. It could be a blessing to a lot of people, and it could be a hindrance too, because it can become drug infested. If they're able to get away and come back at all hours of the night and day, it's going to turn into what they were doing when they were completely on the streets.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would say that it needs to be sanctioned. If there's going to be camping and we're going to allow it, then let's put it in an area that has, security and some accountability to it. Else we're not changing anything. And that's the only way that we can actually get to the relationship building that we heard about earlier today of really getting to know them on a real intimate level to say, what do you need? And if we're just gonna let it, I think, fester and run its own self, they do. They create their own camp boss, if you will.
So Carol, sanctioned, that means security.
Security.
Is there a size where the ability to get to know people individually, just the volume becomes too much? What's a size of a sanctioned encampment?
I've looked at a lot of camps across the United States the last year and a half or so. I think you can have order with 300-400 people. And I think that you can separate it. If anyone's been to San Antonio, the Haven of Hope, where you've got them separated into camping, and then they can move into shelter, then they can move into transitional housing, or they can move into something else. As they're ready, they're moving into another level. But certainly there just has to be some rules in place.
Thank you. Mo?
Yeah, so my experience with the sanctioned camps is, first of all, it fits under that category is the society, is government, are the citizens doing their part by providing the basic needs, food, clothing, and shelter, right? And does a sanctioned camp do that? Initially, yes. There's a few different populations of homeless people going into those sanctioned camps. There's the person that, I'm not finished doing drugs yet, and I want to live this nomadic life. Should they be in a sanctioned camp? Absolutely. There's an opportunity for them as well. There's a person out there that's addicted to drugs that said, you know what, I want to be in this sanctioned camp, and I also want to try and get to the next level. And then we have folks that are suffering or have some challenges with mental health as well. Is there different sanctioned camps for these different populations, right? And I think so. And I also think that once a person gets into one of those sanctioned camps, there needs to be some clear guidelines. Here's how long you're going to be here. Here's a growth plan for you to get to the next step, for you to eventually get the American dream back on the table. But to have a sanctioned camp for those folks that do want to prosper and move up, do you have the right case management there? Are you just there, or are you just letting people sit around and there's no plan and we're not holding their hand and we're not getting them to the next level? One of the things I like about the sanctioned camps is that we know where people are. No matter what you're doing, if you're doing drugs, crime, whatever it may be, we now know where you are. And I think we got a legitimate shot to talk with you, build that trust, build that relationship, and say, oh yeah, a couple months in, by the way, here's another opportunity that exists. And I think a lot of it is in that community piece, it's in that family piece, it's in that relationship piece, helping that person get to the next step. But there needs to be some clear guidelines for those folks. I just came back a couple weeks ago from a sanctioned camp in Rohnert Park, California. And I saw this place go up in 2022. Absolutely beautiful. All the legislatures, all the civic leaders were there, patting themselves on the back. This is a great job. And they did a good job to get it to that point. A couple weeks I go and visit, there's graffiti, there's doors open where the room literally looks like a dump, right? And so once again, where's that accountability piece? Who's gonna be in charge of implementing this? Who's gonna be on site 24/7? Who's gonna be the mentors? Who's gonna be the coaches to move this process forward? Otherwise, you have a beautiful project or containers of homes that are brand new, and then next thing you know, a couple months later, it's garbage because there's no accountability. There's no culture there at all.
D, all the above.
Okay, because I'm running out of time, and then there's all these questions we haven't gone through all these questions, but I want to bottom line it with this one question, and I might run a little over time here, but I really think this is, because I heard just between these panels, I got some feedback where this is the case. If you were here earlier, remember my Mike and Ike story, the nice Cocker Spaniel drug sniffing dog, okay? I don't know I know for a fact that story did not occur in any of the endeavors that anyone on this panel is involved in, okay? I know that that's not where that happens. What that means is that not all of our service providers are looking at this the exact same way. We've heard such common themes here. So my question with this group, but I don't know that that is across the board in this landscape of homeless services. So why is funding continuing to go to organizations that will not be held accountable or hold accountable to others and provide the safe and effective services? So I guess the question is, why are not all, in your opinion, organizations held to this level of accountability that you insist upon? What do you think?
That's a great question, Greg. I think when you start looking at the problems in our communities now, and we need Other Side Academy, we need 30-month programs, we need one-year programs. When you look at treatment today, in spite of the absolutely incredible human beings that work in treatment facilities, and when I say incredible, I don't say that lightly. You have some of the best human beings working in these treatment facilities. The problem is the model is broken. Anybody who thinks that Dave DeRocher, after 27 years of hardcore drug addiction and 4 prison terms, is going to get well in 30 days, you need more help than me. The problem we have today is the government's funding most of these 30, 60, 90-day programs. And when do I have to leave one of those programs? When do I have to leave? When the money's run out. Do you really believe that every single drug addict that leaves a treatment facility is ready the day the money runs out? It isn't the people, it's the model. We already know the science and the data will prove the longer you're in treatment, the better your odds of success. I think Tyler was speaking earlier, and I want to just reemphasize this. He said we have a 90% success rate. If you complete our 2.5-year program and you go across the street and you stay in graduate housing for the entire year, then 86% of the people will be drug-free, crime-free, and employed. If you don't complete that, then it's in the 70s. So I wanted to make sure we touch on that. But that is incredibly, incredibly high when you juxtapose that against other treatment facilities that are 30, 60, or 90 days long. Because, ladies and gentlemen, change takes time. When I was a drug addict, right, I was a liar, a cheater, a thief, a manipulator, violent, hedonistic, self-centered human being. Getting me clean and sober didn't solve anything. I needed to go someplace that addressed those behaviors so I could become the best version of myself. That takes time. The problem with the model today is it's getting shorter and shorter and shorter, and you have to leave when the funding runs out. That's the problem.
So my experience has been that, and you know, I'm blessed to be with an organization that says, you know what, wherever it is that's doing something better than we are, or wherever it is in the world that they're doing things that work, we're going to go learn, we're going to go practice that.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of our resource centers and from the top down, all the employees from the top down can learn a lesson from that. I honestly don't think that we get here today without politicians and legislators that have come around the model and studied it and said, wow, here's what works. I think HB 298 is a direct result of legislators coming around and saying, you know what, this is what I see that works. Here's what's been my experience, right? You're not gonna get there from, you know, speeches and sound bites and photo ops. You have to get in there and practice it, be around the people that are doing it every day, and that's how you learn. That's how you're able to move the needle, is that we have to learn. And one of the things I think we need to stop doing is pointing the finger and saying this organization is doing this organization is not doing that. We're all in together, but I think the education piece of it is to travel around amongst ourselves and around the world and say, what's being done better, and adopt those practices.
Thank you.
I think the really hard part of this is that it's not just a local problem. If we could send Tyler right now back to the Fed side and say, go change it on that level. I tried 10 years ago with Senator Hatch and Senator Lee to change what we call the cliff effect, and to try and move legislation into a ramp effect, because that formula is almost 40 years old on when does somebody lose their benefits on welfare, right? It's still at a $2.85 an hour formula, and not one state is paying that as their minimum wage. And so we've incentivized poverty, and we've incentivized welfare because we never changed the formula. It stays archaic, if you will, right? The same thing happens on this homelessness or housing, affordable housing issue. On a federal level, we're being shoved down these best practices that might not be working anymore. And yet it takes so long to get a change to occur that dollars are attached to those on the federal side. And so the state's hands or local hands get tied, because if you want the money, you have to do it this way, even though we know as providers that it might not necessarily be the best way. So I mean, kind of on that opposite side is, how do we go about this and say, yeah, we're looking at all these things. Lots of people are traveling and seeing real things that are working and that are moving needles, but we got to get it on a bigger scale to change.
Why does that not impact you? I mean, why do those mandates or those cliffs or those disincentives impact the delivery that you provide?
I think as a provider, we've chosen not to take some of those dollars,
okay,
right? If our hands get tied by them, or we cannot do what we think is right or hold some accountability, then we'll just say, we're not taking those dollars.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, that is the second panel. I want to thank our guests. What an incredible work they do. The governor said you're on the side of angels. Thank you so much. Thank you.